Welcome back! Well, in the last video we started exploring Riven, and so far we found a few points of interest. Most notably, we saw this temple that appeared to suggest that Gen is being revered as a god by whomever lives here. Or, at the very least, he's forcing whomever lives here to revere him as such. We also found a way off, but I'm not going to use that yet, because I want to explore more. Such as this area right here with this golden room. However, before I do even that, I'd like to check out this path that I mentioned earlier that goes down the hill. Just in the interest of being systematic and going from right to left. Well, not much to see on this side compared to the other side. But hey, at least we get a nice view of those palm trees on that other island over there. Doesn't look like there's anything else there, though. And there's a gate here, too. Aww, really? Well, we didn't come all this way for nothing. There's another one of these daggers down here, and it looks like it's the exact same design as the one that the Rebel had earlier. Hey, are you thinking what I'm thinking? It worked! We must be really tiny. So what could possibly be hidden behind that locked gate? Oh. Well, that's kind of disappointing. And if I wanted to see what's in the room, I could go in there myself. I'd rather see that up close. What a ripoff. Not to mention, I'm sure OSHA would have a lot to say about this. So I suppose if we can't get Gen on being a ruthless dictator, at least we can get him on having unsafe construction practices. Oh, alright, I'll climb under there again. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned yet is that this area over here on the other side where the temple is not actually another island. It's just a peninsula off the coast of the main island. You can't exactly see it from this vantage point, but I believe it's a little bit more visible from the area that's at the base of the stone steps on the other side. Well, there's no point in putting it off any longer. Let's check out this interesting looking room. There's a button over here on the wall, and that looks pretty tempting, but I want to explore first before I start touching things that might do things I don't want to do yet. Well, you can't say the mood in here isn't solemn. There's a passage that goes through this doorway, and it appears to lead to that giant golden dome, but it's being blocked by this grating here. The interesting thing about it, though, is that it has that same star emblem that we saw in the temple behind the cage. And it even has that same box with legs for the horizontal line in the middle. And it's on the floor, too. Curious. This wall has some writing on it, maybe the ancient text of Dunny, but we can't really translate that. But look right here, there's also a little hole in here. Maybe that's what we used to view the room earlier. And this other wall over here also has the same thing. And this one does too. There's 5 pillars around the room, given that it's a 5-sided room, and each of them have these beetles on it. Let's see if they do anything. Okay. Hopefully there's nothing gross in there. Well, that's a relief. It's just a stained glass painting. Let's see what this is all about. This stained glass painting depicts some sort of guy, and he's sitting in a chair at a desk writing in some sort of blank book. And off the tip of his pen come suns and people and stars and a moon and a dog or something, and some plants and fishies, and insects and reptiles, and another plant. Well, that's kind of cool. This next image shows the same guy perched high above a bunch of people, and he's got a book wrapped around his head, and on the left there's a star or sun or something, and on the right there's a moon, and all the people seem to be adoring and worshipping him. Well, it's not too hard to figure out who this probably is. Based on what we've seen in the temple and what we've read in Atris' journal, this guy is most likely Gen. It makes sense, given the fact that Atris even mentioned that Gen presumes that he's actually writing or creating worlds when he writes. This is contrary to the belief of the Dunny, in which they claim that they're not actually writing worlds as in creation, they're just writing links to existing worlds. This hasn't exactly been explained yet, but it was sort of implied in the first game, as well as the journal where Atris said that he didn't presume to have the power of creation. Now, this third painting depicts something that might be familiar. We see Gen again, and he's holding a star and some fire, but below him is a guy that's being cast into some sort of pit. And if you've played the first Myst game, or have been paying really close attention during this LP so far, then you know that this guy here is Atris, being cast into the Star Fissure, and you can even see little stars here. The book that's flying right above him is the Myst book that he used to link back to Myst as he dropped it. Now, what's rather interesting about this painting is that it depicts Gen as having power over Atris. But according to Atris' journal, the meeting in which he fell into the fissure and used that last linking book was when Gen got trapped on Riven. So in actuality, if we're to believe Atris' side of the story, he was the one who defeated Gen. It appears that Gen has got his facts wrong, or he's trying to deceive other people into believing that he has power, which is probably the more likely case. Also, notice the symbol on the thing on his neck. Doesn't that look familiar? Now, this fourth painting is a little different. It appears to be some sort of organizational chart. See, at the top we have Gen again, but below him we've got 5 different guys, and below each of them are a group of people. The first group of people is building stuff, the second one is learning stuff, the third one is fighting stuff, the fourth one is drawing stuff, and the fifth one is stripping bark off trees, I guess. I wonder what these symbols here are. They look like Tetris pieces, although Tetris comes from tetra, which means 4, so the only Tetris pieces would be this piece right here and this one. The other ones have different numbers of squares. We don't really know what this represents, but since Gen wants to restore the lost Dunny civilization, it's possible that they had an organizational structure similar to that, in which different groups of people did different things. Or it could be how Gen wants to organize people here on Riven if he's positioning himself as a dictator, as we've been suspecting. This last painting is also somewhat different too. We see a hand here with a star symbol, and by now it should be pretty evident that this symbol is what Gen uses to refer to himself, especially in the temple where it was appearing behind the cage in which he would presumably be projected. His hand is touching a blank book, and all around it we see some machine, some people bowing down to it, maybe the same 5 guys that we saw beneath him in the previous painting. And some stumps here. Maybe these were trees that were chopped off or something. Along with some fire, though we don't really know what that is. And there's some sort of chipping device that's chipping up the wood into sawdust. Well, it's not too hard to see what this is about. This is how books are made. And considering that the Dunny specialize in making books, it's not too surprising that Gen would have a painting of it here in this room. Well, that's about all we can see in here. So now it's time to press that button and see what happens. Some machinery is rumbling. And the entire room is rotating. And now we've got this little alcove here where we can look into another hole. Well, that's really odd. It looked like the grate that was over on this wall has moved over here. And whatever's behind it, it doesn't look quite as bright as the Golden Dome. Although, I guess that's kind of hard to live up to. Well, let's try rotating it again and see what happens this time. Another hole we can look through. And this time the grate appears to have moved back. That's rather odd since the room was rotating clockwise, and it made sense if the grate went this way. But the room continued to rotate clockwise, so how did it go the opposite direction back to where it started? Well, one thing's for sure, this is getting more and more curious. Well, at least we can enter the room again, that's nice. But this time around, the grate has moved over here again. And whatever's behind it doesn't look all that exciting. It just looks like another door with the same star symbol on it. You know, I mentioned that, Gen would probably find it appropriate to include a painting about writing books in this room. But if you look around, it seems like pretty much everything in this room could be attributed to something that helps with writing. For example, the columns are made of wood, which is where paper comes from, and specifically these look like tree trunks. There are beetles on these columns, and if you're an Egyptian, I suppose, beetles are where you get your ink. Not to mention that the floor looks like tips of pens on this star here, or quills or something. And this thing up here looks like a pen nib as well. So I suppose you could say that if the temple was the worship center for Gen, then this is the worship center for writing. Well, let's see what happens with another rotation. Well, that's odd. This time we can see no grate through the walls. Just what's going on around here anyway? Okay, it looks like we've moved the room back to its original configuration, because this door is open, and the one that leads to the dome is also open as well, and we can see that from in here inside this antechamber. Well, we'll have to figure out this puzzle in the next video.